Hello everyone, and welcome to Creating with Class. That's Crafty Lessons and Simple Steps with Linda Wirt. Hi, I'm Linda, and today I will be sharing with you some inking techniques that can bring some real depth and dimension to your next paper project. So let me show you a couple of examples, and let's get inking. I have two cards to show you the difference that inking can make in the final look of your project. This one is just cut out with my Cricut machine and then assembled, while this one I actually cut then inked around some of the edges to add some shading and even around the edge of the card to give it more interest and depth. So you can see the comparison between this is not inking and this is inking. And I think you'll agree that the one with the subtle inking brings it a little bit more to life. So let me show you some of the products that you will need in order to do this for your next project. I like to use the brand of ink pads by Memento. They're called Dewdrops, and they have a wide variety of colors, as you can see, and they sell them usually grouped together in a color palette theme. I also use two different kinds of applicators. And that's based on the amount of ink that I want to apply and the type of paper that I'm using. So you'll see I have these, which are made of felt. These are felt applicators. And then I have these, which are squeezy kind of foam applicators. So you can choose whichever you would like. You can experiment with both. I do find that the felt ones are good if you just want some subtle shading. And then the foam ones are perfect if you want to apply a more concentrated amount of ink to your project. You can hold the applicator with your hands in order to do the shading, or they do have an applicator holder that you attach the felt, or you can also peel that off, and it works also for the foam. So you can use the holder, or you can just use your hand, whichever you prefer. So let's start by showing you some examples of how you can do some inking on your next paper project. I'd like to start off showing you how to add just a little color to your projects. I recommend that you use scrap paper to practice before you actually ink your project. This way you will learn exactly how much pressure you need to use to apply the ink to your paper. It's also a good idea to start a little at a time because you always can add more to get a darker effect. At first it's a trial and error, and there are definitely variables such as the thickness and texture of your paper that will also affect the final result. So here you'll see I have a couple of scrap pieces of paper from my cutouts, and I have practiced with different colors to see which would be the best one for my project. So let me show you what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to hold my felt pad, and I'm going to open up my ink pad, and I'm going to pick up my paper in my hand while I'm inking. And I'm going to just press the ink pad with the applicator, and then I'm going to rub it against the white copy paper just to get the excess off. All right, and then I'm just going to brush it along the edges of the paper. And if you'll see, it's starting to color the edges. The reason why I hold the paper in my hand is to control the amount of pressure that I'm doing. I just want subtle coloring around the edges. And by holding the paper, I'm controlling how much ink I can put on, because the paper will either bend or rip if I press too hard. So the times that I want just a little color or just a little subtle coloring, I always hold the paper in my hands. And you just go slightly right off the edge, and this will give you some dimension to your otherwise flat project. So you'll see there, my flower has a little bit more depth to it, dimension, it has some shading to it, just brings it a little bit more to life. The other way that you can do some inking is by actually bringing your shading further into your paper project. So instead of just doing the edges, if I wanted to actually change the actual color of this paper, what I might do is actually bring it further in rather than just the edges. So once again, I'm going to rub this on the paper, and now I'm going to bring it in further, and I'm just going to bring my pad back and forth. And as you see, it's coming in a little bit further than just the edge. And it's actually changing, you know, the shade of my paper, but leaving the original cardstock color also. So I'm just going to bring that around to the other side. And this way I'm just rubbing. Now, if you want more of a subtle and not as dramatic like on this side, what I would do is I would do circles rather than bringing it back and forth. The circular motion makes it a lot lighter, and you don't get as much of a heavy coloring effect. So you'll see the difference here. On this side, the leaf is much darker, and on this side, it's just a little bit more subtle. So it all depends on the way that you apply it and the amount of pressure that you're applying to the paper. But this is soft circular motions, and this is swiping back and forth. And you can see how it has changed the amount of ink that gets applied onto the paper. Another thing you can do is you can try different types of paper. Like I said, the texture definitely affects it. The inks don't work very well with glitter or holographic paper or any type of paper that has a slick coating to it. The ink won't stay on it. Also, if you have textured or embossed paper, the ink is not as consistent because it starts to accumulate in the different parts of the texture of the paper. So if you do want to use embossed paper, I would recommend that you ink it first before you emboss. The other thing you can do with your inks is change any kind of white core paper so you don't see the white anymore. So for instance, this paper is called white core paper. You can see the white edge, meaning the color for this paper was applied to both sides. The color doesn't go all the way through the paper. So if I were to do a design and you would see the edge, you would see the white edge of the paper. So if I don't want that, I would grab my ink pad, and instead of using a felt applicator, I would just run this along the edge of my paper, and you'll notice it colors it beautifully. So this way I don't have that white edge of the paper showing. So when I cut it or apply it in my project and you see the edges, you won't see any white anymore. It'll be orange. So you can take the ink pad and just use it directly on the paper itself. I hope you'll try adding some depth and dimension to your next paper project with some inking techniques that I've shared with you today in this video, just to show you some examples of other types of projects that I've done. As you can see, this particular card has some inking done around the edges, done in between the cutouts, just to add a little more interest to it. And I didn't want it just stark pink with the flowers behind it, so I softened it a bit with some of the rhubarb ink color. And this card, also I ended up doing some inking around the edges of the card. Actually, on some of the white, I just didn't want stark white, so I brought in the same purple that I used on the card to add some shading to that. And it just gives it a little bit more interest and pops and gives it more depth, especially if you don't want to use foam dots or anything like that. The inking can give it more depth instead of using, like I said, any types of layering type of effects that you would like. It just gives it a little bit more 3D effect. So I hope this information was good and interesting for you to use. I will have all the information for the products I've used in this video down in the description box. If you learned something new and enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up by clicking on the like button below, and please click on the subscribe button so you will be able to be notified the next time one of my video tutorials come out. Thank you very much, and happy crafting.